Hey, I'm Jacob Cooperman, and you were watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering combat sports since the 1990s, and Miguel has match-made over 200 different events amongst various promotions worldwide. Please subscribe and be on the lookout for future episodes. As for me, you can check me out at Gloves Up on YouTube and Coop TV with 3 O's on Instagram. Thank you guys, and enjoy the episode.
All right, this is Todd Atkins, and I'm back with Miguel Iturrate. As always, I'm grateful to spend time with Miguel and talk about the sport. And before we start, subscribe to the channel, hit the subscribe button, and check out our memberships. We got some 99-cent memberships, and just support the channel. We've been doing this a lot, so yeah, check that out. And we got an interesting story here that I think kind of flew on the radar a little bit. Oscar De La Hoya brought it up on his Clapback Thursdays, which I kind of enjoy. They're pretty amusing. But it was actually a serious topic. You know, he just kind of touched on a little bit in his own make fun of people type way. But it's an interesting story, and this would be the top rank getting dropped by ESPN due to this lawsuit. So I wanted to let Miguel kind of jump in and give the details to kind of start off here.
Well, this story apparently broke at the end of February, so it didn't make mainstream news. We caught it here. I guess, People Magazine and some big media outlets have published articles on it, so I guess you can say we kind of missed it. We've been down on boxing for a little bit. We haven't really been following it. And De La Hoya's podcast is where I first saw it. But Todd gave me this nickname of Mystic Miguel, and I think if you listen to our podcasts for the last couple of years, especially around the Tyson Fury fight with Ngannou and other appearances of Tyson Fury, we've mentioned Daniel Kinahan's name not on just one or two podcasts. I mean, the guy's name pretty much comes up a lot in boxing circles. The guy lives in Dubai. He's got an underworld reputation. I don't know if he's a drug dealer or what the deal is with his nefarious background, but he's wanted. And as far as the Mystic Miguel, I think me and Todd were, some of the people that were not surprised that Kinahan's name, Kinahan has a way of, guys like that have a way of not being seen when they don't want to be seen. But that doesn't mean they went away. And obviously, in this situation, the guy's never gone away from being involved in boxing. And again, boxing, I present to you, in the case of a guy like a Daniel Kinahan, who's going to be considered very wealthy, right? It's a complete ego trip. It's just you like to be involved, you like to be around the fighters. The fighters may not look at me and Todd, podcasters with, maybe, it's honest. We have a little bit of a limited audience, and none of them are going to jump out of their way to do us favors. But if one of us had a couple $100 million in the bank, you'd see the attitude change a lot, right? The fighters would be like, oh, this guy maybe can do something for me, or this or that, or at the very least, it's cool to be hanging out with him. But Daniel Kinahan has never gone away from the boxing sport. And this lawsuit, as far as I understand it, Bob Arum is at this point 90. The last couple of times I saw him in public, he was starting to deteriorate a little more. Like he was starting to be a very older and feeble-looking person, and not talking as much. I mean, he held up his end on the microphone for a long time, into in his 80s and stuff. He was still a force, talking with people and stuff, in promoting a fight and being a force. But now he's 90, and the main spin of most of these articles is that Bob's not involved. Bob's not involved. So, yeah, I can understand nobody wants to, um, put a 90-year-old man in jail, right? I might actually be surprised if Bob wasn't involved. Only because, it's kind of controversial, but semi-related. Many years ago, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia sent a hit squad to kill a journalist they didn't like in their embassy in Turkey, and they bought equipment to butcher this guy and take his body out in parts. And then, MLB, I think his name is. Maybe that's Major League Baseball. Maybe it's MSB. Well, Crown Prince Mohammed had the audacity to say, "I didn't know anything about it." Nothing happens in that country without him knowing about it. None of those people under him, especially his security team and people who operate directly for him, is ever going to do a move like, well, what was, how do you couch that? Well, we killed the guy. It's a favor to you. We kind of want, it's your birthday. We wanted to do you a favor. We know you hate him, so we killed him. Those guys had no way of knowing. As it turns out now, in retrospect, the backlash for that murder to Saudi Arabia and to the Crown Prince really wasn't that strong. But they really had no way of knowing what the backlash would be. Therefore, nobody under him would take a risk like that unless the boss knew. And I will liken him to Bob Arum. Bob's run that empire for 50 years. Maybe he's, slumped into, what many people claim Joe Biden was, which is, weak enough that other people are kind of pulling the strings, and Biden is, not as in control as he looks. I'm not beating up Joe Biden. I really, I live overseas. I could care less about American politics, right? But maybe Bob is feeble-minded enough at this point that other people are running the show there. But there are some things that, I would question whether the truth is that Bob didn't know about it. Bob's also, worth a few $100 million. He's been very successful in boxing. Some of the fights with Tyson Fury would probably fall into some of the bigger, especially in the last 10 years, the biggest fights he's done. You going to tell me he wasn't involved, or you're going to tell me that he was going to say, no, well, we've got a shady mobster, so we don't want to do this fight? That doesn't really add up to all the evidence we have about Bob for the last 50 years. Bob dealt with, criminal African dictators to make to make, fights back in the old days. I don't think Bob is too shy, as long as the money's right, about dealing with shady people. Oscar De La Hoya, in his podcast, said it himself. About 80% of the people he deals with in boxing are kind of scummy. So the idea that Bob didn't know, or that they didn't want Bob to know about it because it's shady and he might miss the idea, I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that. But again, I'm not into putting Bob in jail. So the way the story goes is that Todd DeBoof, who's Bob Arum's son-in-law, went to a guy named Billy Keane in order to secure money, or to line up the money so that they can make the Tyson Fury fight happen. And Keane is now claiming in a lawsuit that he was not paid for his services. So he's suing DeBoof, and now all of a sudden we're in the underworld of Irish boxing and Irish drug dealing and whatever else is going on there. Again, this has been a perennial story in boxing for probably a couple of 100 years. Is the guys with the money are the guys, and that. And here's the one thing too, and we've talked about this in many podcasts. the difference between Dana and the Fertitas and a guy like Don Davis is the passion for the sport. I have no doubt Daniel Kinahan is into boxing. There's no doubt in my mind that the guy has a passion for the sport. He loves it. He loves and being the guy that makes the fights happen and stuff like that. That's what turns that guy on, right? So these guys have always been around. It doesn't surprise me that they've been around. It does surprise me that DeBoof would be um, remiss in paying these guys. At the end of the day, I don't know if Daniel Kinahan's rap sheet, falls into, a couple missing people, disappearing people, and that kind of thing. But he's probably got, you know, some type of enforcement. So I don't know why you would cross these guys and not pay them. He's demanding $25 million in the lawsuit. Maybe that's a lot of money. Maybe that's probably 1/3 of what Tyson Fury made and he was actually in the ring. All this other guy did was line up the other people. But it's an interesting situation to come up in boxing, because what I think we're going to be looking at here is we're going to be looking at Top Rank derailing hard.
Yeah, I mean,
Bob,
ESPN dropped him. That's huge.
yeah, that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
Bob Arum was, as we said, has been in the sport for 50 years. Everybody knows him, and he's a force to be reckoned with. I'm sure Todd DeBoof has done, has a resume somewhere, but Todd DeBoof does not cross over into the mainstream world of boxing as a huge name. He's several tiers below Bob Arum. So if the idea was, and his family also, right? So if the idea was that Todd DeBoof is going to take over Top Rank, I think what you're going to see is that Top Rank stock, quote unquote, is going to take a tank. It's going to take a big dive when Bob is gone, or maybe that handoff is all going to be taken care of in the next year, along with the lawsuit and along with all this. Yeah, DeBoof has done himself some damage in the business as well, because again, you don't. It's one of those things that I did a lot of shows. I did some shows that made money. I did some shows that lost money. But if you've agreed to a salary or a payment to somebody, that stuff is murder to your business when you start to get a reputation of not paying people. There were times where I worked at a bank. I had a decent six-figure salary. Um, you know, we were doing smaller shows. I don't have kids. So, my wife had a decent six-figure salary. So I was never rich, but I could go into my bank account and pay $5,000 to somebody if we were short $5,000. I didn't like to do it. Now I wish I maybe hadn't done it. You know what I mean? But the point is you never not pay people. So what Todd DeBoof was doing by thinking that he was going to double cross Irish mobsters and not pay them, well, now he can reap what he sows. He's going to be in court, and there's going to be a lot of talking and explaining to do. I see that the court has been selected as California. I don't think the state of California really has anything against Daniel Kinahan. I think Kinahan is whatever underground type of life he has. He's operating in Europe, and you can see over the years the connection between Spain, which is a vacation hotspot, um, and an entry point for drugs, and Ireland and England and the fighters there, and Kinahan's been around. So I think Europe's his theater. So he really has nothing to lose. And I don't think Kinahan's even going to, obviously he's not going to show himself in court or anything like that. So, yeah, I think what has happened here is that the booth made a mistake not paying somebody he should have paid. It's number one thing that you do in this business is pay people. Nobody wants to go home, unpaid for the work that they've done. Fighters first and foremost, obviously, but in this case, if you're paying somebody to help you move something or whatever, you also now he's reaping what he sowed. Now he has to explain why he didn't pay this guy. And I think it's bad news. I think you're watching the end Top Rank, one of the biggest boxing entities in the last 50 years. And it's a derailment. It's not an honorable, we lost Bob Arum. We're going to sunset the company. And, we're going to end with one big show, or we're going to, do presentations of the library. I mean, can you imagine the library that Bob Arum owns? You know,
You don't think anyone else would pick him up?
yeah, but it won't be under the Top Rank thing, and that leads me to the actual other point of this is, because it's funny. Oscar De La Hoya and Dana White have been involved in like a pretty public feud for years now. You know, Dana's on record saying he doesn't think Oscar is, I'll put it nicely, he doesn't think Oscar's very smart. Oscar's also got a couple of $100 million in the bank. Um, you can make the argument that Oscar is, a guy who, because of the elite level of his performance while he boxed, was able to carry that over into business. I'm not sure he's all that great a businessman. He was able to, you know, uh, his breakup with Canelo wasn't really that elegant. And again, I present to you that Canelo is the kind of guy, you do what you have to do not to lose him. You know what I mean? That's the cash cow in boxing for the last, however many years. So, it's up and down. But so Oscar is sitting there, and in this podcast, he also mentioned Dana White and Dana's entry into boxing, and how Dana now has a financial backer. But he also kind of took the opportunity to put Dana down and say, you can't do boxing because he doesn't have any boxers. He's got no boxers under contract. What are you going to do? And also, he poo-pooed a little bit about the salary structure they presented and things like that, which to me does seem low for boxing. But, what if PKO purchased Top Rank at cents on the dollar because of this debacle? It would be, I don't know if your volume went off again, Todd. I think you're on silence again.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there you go. That's another great Miguel point right there. That could become another Mystic Miguel nugget in the future.
Yeah, it could, maybe. PKO's got the money. What can Top Rank possibly be worth, especially after this? Even if you priced it high, Todd DeBoof, I get who Todd DeBoof is a stepson or a son-in-law, or I don't know exactly what the relation is. He married to Bob's daughter, or what the deal is there, what the situation is. But when Bob goes, somebody's going to get all that money, right? So, what if they came in with a credible offer for $1 billion, which is interesting because that's just, it's like 3 or 4 times as much as they're paying out to the fighters in their own sport in this lawsuit, right? So, but they could buy an entire library that includes Muhammad Ali, that includes uh, the Four Kings, Roberto Duran, Marvin Hagler, Tommy Hearns. You're talking about a significant piece of history that more than trumps even the UFC now has got 30 years of history. You're talking about a bigger library and a stronger library with bigger names. The Muhammad Ali being probably the crown jewel of that, but there are also some unbelievable like I said, Tommy Hearns, Marvin Hagler, these types of names, those fights in the 70s and 80s all happened on Bob Aaron's watch. So what are they worth now? Sure, you can make history shows and show fights like that and things like that, but it still gives you a significant power base. Not to mention, do they still have Tyson Fury under contract? Is the contract with Tyson Fury going to be null and void? What other boxers are under contract with Top Rank at this point in the world? What does buying Top Rank give Dana White instantly 60 to 80 fighters under contract? Because then, Oscar's little diatribe on his podcast, you know, would be points towards those people who think Oscar's not that smart. So he's like, well, Dana can't do fights. Well, guess what? Overnight, if he buys Top Rank, guess what? He now has X amount of fighters under contract, and he can now do fights. So it becomes a very interesting situation. Now, you know me, I like to try to see beyond that, right? So there was also news recently in the boxing world that Eddie Hearn might be retiring. So now,
Yeah.
if TKO was to make a move to buy Eddie Hearn's company and Top Rank's company, they are instantly bigger than Golden Boy. And we know what we know about Dana, love him or hate him. What we know about Dana is that the guy likes to make big moves, likes to get attention, likes to do things that surprise people. And that would be a big surprise, but you're looking at a situation where should that happen, and it really is just speculation on my point, but could TKO and whatever the Arab Sheik who's backing them at this point is made. That's the other beautiful part. Dana and TKO
Turkey
may
Al
not even,
Sheik.
yeah, these guys may not even have to use their own billions of dollars to pick up the library and pick up the contracts.
Yeah, Turkey might do it.
Yeah, they might. They may have found somebody who will put his money up front, and these guys won't even be, like Dana and the UFC. How many times have we heard this story? We went 40 million in the hole. They won't even need to be 40 million in the hole for boxing. They would have inherited two of the biggest companies on the planet, or purchased two of the biggest companies on the planet, and they're instantly a player, and instantly a bigger player than Oscar. And Oscar would certainly feel like he was crossing the street and got hit by a truck. So that's what I think is going to be interesting, is what fallout does come of this. Top Rank is probably finished. I always thought Top Rank would be finished when Bob was finished anyway, because Bob is one of those, for lack of a better word, he's one of those people that, once in a generation kind of people. Energy, um, brains. The guy's a Harvard lawyer, right? So, you know, um, passion in this case, you can't say Bob didn't like the sport. You can't say he was Don Davising this for the last 50 years, although he made good money, right? But you can't say that he was in this, kind of like, oh, another show, I'm tired. No, he loved it. He loved being the man in boxing, right? But so I always thought that Top Rank was going to go on a slide when Bob Arum left. Now, maybe the heir apparent, who was this Todd DeBoof guy, went and screwed up and got his name put into a lawsuit and into something that's going to be pretty public. So that may take away from it. So we'll see how that turns out. Does the company get sunsetted? Do they retire? Does Todd DeBoof grab whatever money I'm sure Todd DeBoof's not poor. So does he just go off and retire or do something else? Or do they sell the company, grab significant amounts of more money, and leave it to Dana to enter boxing the way he's been kind of teasing for more than a decade? So that's what's going to be interesting, because I don't think Oscar has got the, like I said, Oscar's a man with significant resources. Golden Boy is not a small company. And Oscar himself is worth a few $100 million also. But I don't think he's got the resources to take on, TKO and an Arab Sheik. So that's what to me is the most interesting. Maybe, like I said, this is speculation, so maybe nothing comes of this. But if I thought of it, you don't think Dana's thought of it? I wonder what Top Rank would cost me to buy.
I wonder if Oscar would try to do it.
I see, and that's
Because
where
he'd be dumb to say, if he doesn't know that TKO is probably going to consider it, then
that's where I think Oscar is
and he has a
not.
relationship with Aram. Aram promoted some of his fights.
Yeah, and he said that he loves Bob, and he was the first. It's popped up in some of the other articles too, but he was very clear about how Bob doesn't know anything about the Daniel Kinahan, stuff, and protecting Bob and kind of, you know, uh, paying his respects to an elder statesman in the sport. It's what I would expect him to do.
And Aram doesn't like Dana White either.
Yeah, but
At all.
again, if Todd DeBoof is changing Bob's diapers at this point, which at a significantly advanced age, he may have crossed over into that world of you know uh, what was the name of the song? There was a song.
I'm sure he's got other people to do that.
There's a
I'm sure,
song,
yeah.
"Elderlies Are Like Children," right?
Yeah.
At some point you have to. If Bob has crossed over into the point where he's got to be taken care of again, and he's no longer what he once was, then you don't know. You don't know. And again, with Bob being a big player, I wonder. Todd DeBoof was president and his family. So is this the guy that they're going to present to us as the new Bob Arum? Because he already fell significantly short over the last few years as far as his career and knowledge, what people know about him and stuff. He's certainly not the public image that Bob Arum was in the last 50 years. But I still don't know if Golden Boy has the resources to buy that company.
Right, and TKO could outbid him.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And again, if Bob's not making the decision for not liking Dana, that's all well and good. But again, we made reference to this. Todd, Bob is a Harvard lawyer worth a couple $100 million. Money talks, and if he's going to be out of the game and his family's going to be out of the game, who cares who they sell to? If they're going to walk away, $1 billion offer, who knows? Who knows what kind of offer? So it's very interesting times in boxing, and I look at it, and boxing doesn't have, a couple of years ago or a year ago or whenever it was, you had Ngannou going to boxing, and you had, Anthony Joshua and these types of things. Right now, I don't know if boxing has like a marquee matchup that people are waiting for, like in coming up in next month, or boxing is in a kind of a pregnant pause. I think in
They have
May
Canelo
here.
Crawford. I think that's something.
First, Canelo signed to fight a guy named William Skull
Right.
May 3rd. Right. So again, and that's to unite some super middleweight belts. Super middleweight is 168 pounds. That's 20 pounds big, and Canelo's gonna have to cut to make that. That's 20 pounds bigger than welterweight where Crawford is. So that's almost like saying to me, we could do Sean O'Malley against Conor McGregor. It's not the same weight class. It's not as interesting a fight in terms of marquee value. And the thing about Crawford is Crawford, who I consider Crawford better than Mayweather. Like I think Crawford is maybe the best boxer I've ever seen. I just think he's spectacular in terms of talent, but he's never crossed over into being a huge marquee star. So so we'll see. But again, you've got Canelo fighting in about a month against a B class name, maybe a C class name. There's really nothing on the radar for boxing except for news being made outside of the ring, you know? So it's going to be very interesting to me to see how all this plays out. Um, we'll see. We'll see. If, maybe they write the check, get him to drop the lawsuit, and you get business as usual for a little while. But there's something big coming because, like I said, the Bob Arum can't live forever. And I think that replacing Bob Arum is an impossible task. So, he's been, like I said, 50 years of iconic boxing the whole time, always involved, high energy guy. Um, I haven't seen, we have, I think we've even mentioned on podcasts like Todd DeBoof didn't even really cross into the radar as far as like a danger. Like, people are like, well, Todd DeBoof's been, for the next 30 years, Todd DeBoof will run boxing. Nobody said that. Nobody said that. They know that he might take over the company, but I don't think it's very capable of sustaining the type of um, level that he has there. So we'll see if Dana is somehow able to seize this opportunity and this lull in the sport to actually make an impact. I wasn't that impressed with Dana's pay scales that they published. Um, so we'll see if there's any adjustments on there. But again, Dana has always been very good. Again, Oscar De La Hoya mentioned in his podcast, he said, box pay-per-view boxers aren't going to box for $750. That's Dana's published pay scale that he put out there, right? But
Right.
again, just what do we know, Todd? We don't know anything, right? But what we do know is that Dana started his path to the top of the mountain in MMA by giving secret locker room bonuses. So what do you do? What do you do if they're going to pay you $750 on the contract? That's the contract that appears on the one pager with the boxing commissions, and then there's all kinds of extra other money heading your way, one way or another. Bonuses or this or the other thing. So Oscar shouldn't sit too, you know, on his laurels there and be like, well, nobody's going to box for that because they don't make it happen. It's funny. Sam Stout, I think the Canadian MMA fighter, who was a very credible, very excellent lightweight, you know, probably 15 years or more ago. Um, I believe he fought a war with Spencer Fisher. And that's the fight that Dana gave the first bonus out to. And Sam told me himself that he had got a check in an envelope from Dana for $500. It was a $500 bonus. Fast forward, I don't even know how much time you fast forward, but not much. Dana uh, broke Monty Cox's relationship with Matt Hughes with a $5 million bonus. So to go from 500 to 5 million, you guys are better at me than math, so you can do the math, but it's 1,000 times or something like that. So just the fact that Dana's published that they're going to pay boxers $750 doesn't mean that's all $750,000 for their main event fights. Doesn't mean that that's all the money they're going to get. There are other ways and other things that they can do. And again, it won't touch on the boxing commission or the one pager contracts that are on there. So, and again, and Dana, like it or not, has a reputation Have you ever heard that Dana didn't pay somebody?
No.
So he knows. He knows. So and if you're in a room and you're like, man, this contract is for $750,000. Let's say you're Tyson Fury. This contract is for $750,000, and you're going to pay me. And I made 40 million in my last fight. And Dana says to you, "Don't worry about it. I got you." You do you believe him? I think I would be inclined to believe that almost every boxer on the planet would believe him until they found somebody, until somebody comes forward and says, he didn't pay me, or they're not honoring their contracts, or this or the other thing. But Dana's always been careful about that aspect of his reputation. He was not good with anybody else doing business in his world, from newspapers to t-shirt companies to managers to everybody else. But the fighters, he's always taken care of. So again, I think Oscar's let himself be fooled on a couple of different levels with this. And that is, that Dana's published paid purses for his boxing event are all that you're going to see. And also he's let himself be fooled by saying, well, Dana can't do fights because he doesn't have any fighters under contract. Again, Dana could go through like, okay, well, we got one boxer under contract, and now I got three boxers under contract, and slowly building up, or he could take care of all that with one fell swoop and pick up a couple of companies that already have boxers under contract. So that's what you're looking at. I think the action in boxing is actually going to be more exciting outside the ring than inside the ring for the next 6 months to a year.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing to parlay into as far as, I wanted to talk a little bit about PFL. I know you've kind of been, make fun of PFL a little bit, but, they did start the tournaments, and I was a big fan of the Bellator tournament format. And they're kind of doing what you would hope they would do, which is now they're going to have weekly events, every Thursday. So the next one they got is April 10th, I'm sorry, April 11th, then April 18th. Then they have a little bit of a lull till May 1st. Then they start the second rounds June 12th, June 20, June 27, August 1st. August looks like it's 16th, 15th, and then August 21st. So they're starting to get into where they're doing regular content. And for me, the tournament format is just an easy thing to follow. Whoever's fighting it. When I first started watching Bjorn Rebney's Bellator, those guys weren't in the UFC, but I watched it, and the fights, some of the guys looked pretty good, and I knew who they were going to fight next, so I was like, I don't have no problem with the fact that these guys aren't in the UFC. I'll watch it. I'll see who wins it, and yeah, I think that's how some people could catch on to it. I'm not saying it's going to blow up, but to me, it's a better format than what the UFC has right now.
Like I said, I could argue that. I do agree with you, especially for a casual fan, that the tournament gives you a thread of a storyline that you can follow.
Right.
And that makes a lot of things easy. But I think, when was the first UFC? 1993. So we're in year 32, 33 of this.
Yeah.
I think if one thing has been proven, and Bellator went away from it also, is that the tournament format is not really a sustainable format.
Bellator did
do
go
it
away from it, but Scott Coker started doing Grand Prix after a while, so they were already kind of migrating back to it before Coker got canned.
Yeah, and I think that's the correct role for a tournament, is that you can bust out with a tournament every few years, and hope that you can. But if you think that you're going to run just tournaments, the level of complication in the tournament, and maybe not one tournament, but sustaining running tournaments all the time, the level of complication, simply fighters that won't fight, fighters that don't happen for whatever reason, injury, money, negotiations, um, whatever the reasons are, tournaments are very hard to sustain over a period of time. The UFC, I think, did 10 tournaments, maybe 11 tournaments, maybe 12 tournaments, like around there, because I think they also went from like 8-man tournaments to 4-man tournaments first. I think Bolander won a 4-man tournament and things. But again, it's not really sustainable. If you look at the Bolander tournament, I'm not maybe I know he fought an average guy who was an upstate New York police officer in the tournament final. I'm not sure if that guy was, and his name is going to escape me now. I guess I could look it up, but I'm not sure if that guy was the alternate that day. But they were. This becomes your problem. You're going to be you're going to be selling something that is almost impossible to deliver 100% of the time. The UFC doesn't deliver 100% of their fights either. Obviously, they have fights fall apart and this, that, or the other thing. But what they do almost on a perfect basis is deliver every single show, you know? And so, what is the EFL going to do if they have a serious, uh, sustainability problem with fighters that are not willing to fight in the tournament or not wanting to keep going in the tournament? Like, they already sort of ran into the problem um with Kayla Harrison. You know, I mean, the bottom line is Kayla Harrison won a couple of big tournaments, right? So she took home $1 million a couple of times, but you know, she didn't come back for another tournament. After you win a couple of tournaments, you don't want to do tournaments anymore. And that's a big factor also. So will the fighter, once a fighter is kind of taking care of his weight class in an 8-man tournament, maybe a second 8-man tournament, are you really going to? And again, the training camp. I'm not saying the UFC's, with their 2 fights in a year kind of format for their top guys. I'm not saying that that's optimal either. I'm saying that you probably would have fighters say, "No, I'd like to do 3 fights in a year." But I don't think that you'd see many top tier fighters be like, "All right, sign me up for 3 fights in 4 months again." You know what I mean? So they're going to have you're on mute again. Um,
Yeah,
so
that is the challenge. I agree with that. That could be the challenge because getting guys, Bellator, the guy would win the tournament, then he would fight the champion, and if he didn't win, now he's got to do that gauntlet again. That can be a big challenge. Yeah.
people are just simply not going to want to do it. And again, in terms of the tournament, the idea too, I think, if you're trying to manage everything, a company for real, the tournament format could also save you money rather than matchmaking and making even fights. So in other words, the earlier fights are a little less money. And then, there's a big prize at the end of which only one guy wins. And, salaries are different now than they were in the old days. But still, you're trying to manage money and you're trying to give a big prize out as a glossy prize to these guys and things. And again, you're going to have guys that are like, man, I just lost the opening fight of my tournament. I didn't count on that. I didn't expect to do that. Does And you're saying they're doing weekly shows. Does weekly shows include slots for the guys who've lost, or those guys, or they focus so much on the tournament that anybody who's an early round loser in the tournament is going to be looking at a sustained period of time off?
We'll have to follow that and see, you know,
Yeah,
because this is
yeah,
kind of
it'll
the
be interesting.
inauguration of it. Yeah.
And they might come to the August show and add 3 or 4 fights to whatever is announced with guys that have lost before and keep guys in the rotation. It might happen. It might happen, but it might not.
When you have,
And
when you have your champions card, because they have like multiple tournaments, going on.
yeah, see, that's the thing is, I think they've overcomplicated things. with the UFC, we talked about this a little bit off the air, and it started, I think, even under Bob Meyrowitz's watch, where what the UFC sold more than anything was the UFC brand.
Right.
And they've always sold that more than the fighters. Even in the heydays of Tito Ortiz and BJ Penn, when BJ Penn and Tito became difficult to deal with, they just let them go. And maybe spent, a little bit where the pay-per-view numbers dropped down a little bit because they didn't have their biggest stars, but they picked back up again. Everything's a cycle. What they always sold, and like I said, even in the I think it was Joe Silva that used to that at some point sent the news out, and I never really had this problem because I did about 98% of my shows in a ring. I always liked the ring better than the cage for various reasons. Number one, it's less of an obstructed view for the live audience. If you're not in the first 5 rows or 6 rows at a UFC, you're not going to be able to see through the cage. I don't like it. But anyway, the point is what they were branding was the octagon, the UFC octagon. And you were no longer able to do a cage show with an octagon. This is why you saw things like Mars use the circle of truth. And even King of the Cage, I think it had like a hexagon or something. You could not use octagon because the UFC had it branded and it was their brand and their name. And I think that's why if even a main event drops out of a UFC, they will still do the show. If Canelo drops out of this May 5th fight, that show's not going on. I can tell you that right now because Canelo is the only name on the show. But the UFC will roll out their show every single time. They've only canceled a couple of shows, and those were all for, certain reasons. I canceled 2 shows in my entire career. One show was the week after 9/11. So we couldn't even get all the fighters to Florida for that show. And then the other show was here in Costa Rica. The venue we were using had some kind of heavy metal concert like the week before, and people left the concert and kind of broke some windows in the neighborhood and things like that. And the venue lost their insurance. And we actually went through all the logistics and found a new building to do the show in. But it was 40 miles from the venue. Like if it was next door or nearby, you could expect people, but to expect people to go 40 miles from one building to where the other one is, just because they're going to come see your show, it looked like it was going to be a debacle. And my boss at the time, he left it for me to make the call. And I said, I am of the opinion you never cancel a show, but this show needs to be canceled. And again, we lost the venue, and replacing a venue with less than a week's notice is not really very, very good. Ticket sales, or even, we actually logistically could do it, but yeah, it didn't work out. So those are 2 shows I canceled. The UFC also, they couldn't get a main event fighter to fight John Jones, or John Jones refused to do a fight on short notice with somebody different. So they canceled. Yeah, so they canceled the show and stuff like that. But I think Dana would say, Miguel's an idiot, but he's right on that. You never cancel a show. And, we're both coming from a situation where outside of we had to cancel shows. We were forced to by fate. It's not that we want to, or we've also probably jumped through hoops to make shows happen. So you never cancel a show. Can the PFL sustain their tournaments, and what do they do if they're not the PFL brand? Again, like I said, the PFL now they've got 8 different types of tournament, Champions Tournament, and Europeans and this and that and the other stuff, and they should have been hyping all just the PFL. And they're mixing things up, so I don't agree with the way they've managed their marketing. I think the marketing has made it a little bit more of a confusion, and I think the UFC got it right when they just the big brand, the brand that circumvents and supersedes everything, is the UFC.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting.
we'll
I
see.
want to see. Yeah, because me, I'm a big fan of this kind of thing, and I'm kind of hoping. I thought Bellator was gaining momentum, but Bjorn, he was difficult to work with and blah blah blah. But the product itself was gaining momentum online and stuff. There were more people watching it than in the beginning.
Oh, yeah, and then yeah, if Bjorn had not shot himself in the foot, and like you said, be a little bit of a strong personality. You know, the difference between him and Dana is basically that Dana gets away with shit that that Bjorn couldn't get away with. So
Hmm.
you can that's part of the once in a generation type of description we gave to Bob Arum also is Bjorn just turned out to be another MMA promoter, whereas Dana is the landmark promoter of our lifetimes, right? So something wasn't up there. And again, like I said, and you took a guy like Eddie. I always credit, and again, this may be because I always followed Eddie Alvarez, and Eddie Alvarez was a fighter that I made maybe 10 or 12 of his earlier fights in his career for. I turned him into a champion. Um, I he was one of the first guys that we paid not super great. I'm sure he made more money afterwards, but we paid him respectful amounts of money, not 2 and 2. You know, I went to his wedding. I know his wife. I know his kids. So I always watched him, even when I was leaving the sport or living in Costa Rica and doing sports at the sport at a smaller level here. I always watched what Eddie was doing, and I could tell you right away that that was one of the big responsibilities of Bjorn, acting like Bellator was bigger than the fighters, and he was wrong. He was wrong. And it touches on one of the other points. Maybe maybe if he had handled it correctly, they could have just let Eddie go, which I think is what Eddie wanted. Actually, they could have just let Eddie go and charge forward with Bellator and done what Dana did, which is just put your head down, run 6 shows in the next 7 weeks, and people will forget about Eddie Alvarez quickly. But he crossed the biggest line, and we just talked about it in this podcast. The biggest line in the sport is not paying people, and in a sort of underhanded lawyer type of way, that's precisely what Bjorn tried to do to Eddie, is not pay him. So yeah, that's where he made his fatal mistake. But when Coker came on, they left the tournament format quickly. So again, just to circle back around, we'll see. We'll see how many of the tournament. We always used to say too, it's show week. 3 things are going to go wrong. So we'll see if they're running show after show after show for several weeks in a row, and a couple of things go wrong for every show. We'll see how that affects the product they're putting on ESPN. Whether they're going to deliver the second round of a tournament, the third round of a tournament, the finalists, whether they've got backups, whether they're going to wind up with a tournament that's short, that doesn't have enough fighters, that doesn't have enough sustainability. Nothing about what the way the PFL runs things really uh, lets me feel like I trust them. Yeah, they'll do fine. I trust them. They know what they're doing. Hasn't been that way, you know. So we'll see. We'll see. Um, again, I wonder if it's available on the internet. Maybe you can check. What did the fight with that Brazilian guy and Ngannou do on pay-per-view?
No idea. I can look, but I don't know
Yeah,
if they
let's
even
see. Let's
have
see if
those
it comes up.
numbers.
I would bet I would bet that there's 0% chance that it sold more than 100,000 pay-per-views. So we'll see. And that's their biggest star. That's the guy that made. So we'll see. We'll
I
see.
don't see
And
anything.
yeah, when is Ngannou going to fight again?
That's a good question. That's a
Again,
whole nother story to get into, though.
yeah, but again, you've got your signature fighter, the guy that you put a lot of the company's stock into bringing along, and you've presented him against a total unknown. He's done more boxing fights than MMA fights.
Yeah, it's almost like if you look back at it now and you look at the moves that PFL's made, where they pretty much let go of all the Bellator champions, they never fought. I think if they had it do over again, they wouldn't even have tried to get Francis Ngannou.
Yeah, the benefits to the company now are just not there. You know,
Maybe it
I
had to
think
do with maybe it had to do with TV. Like when you're making a TV deal or something. Hey, we got Francis Ngannou now.
yeah, that could be. I think even it goes a little bit beyond that and a little bit more into, like I said, I did a lightweight tournament that I think was a pretty standout lightweight tournament, but we were never able to finish it. My one second round fight in that tournament, and this is when these guys were in their prime. These were not older fighters like the GFL, which maybe we'll get to here. Um, was the second round fight was Eve Edwards against Joaquin Hansen, and Pride had a contract with Joaquin, and um, Pride allowed Joaquin to participate in our tournament's first round fight, where he fought a Russian fighter who was also very tough, a very good fighter, and a very hard worker, but unknown. So Pride was okay with that. When they heard he was fighting Eve Edwards, Pride invoked a clause in their contract, and I give Joaquin's family a lot of credit because um, to be released from the contract, they would have had to pay $1 million. And because they didn't like the way Pride handled it and held it over their head, they actually considered making that payment. I don't know if his family is very wealthy or whatever it is, but I do know that there was thought given getting out of that Pride contract because they didn't like the way Pride handled him. And, I had a very good relationship with Joaquin and his managers and stuff. If you look at my career, I used a lot of guys from Finland before, you know, those guys were ready for the international levels. And if you include Abu Dhabi, where Joaquin was a standout and John Olav was a standout from Scandinavia, I was the first matchmaker using Scandinavian fighters years before Gustafsson and those guys. So Joaquin also liked to perform for us. Um, and Joaquin wanted to do the fight with Eve Edwards, but Pride would not allow it, and Pride flexed muscle. So what I think happened here is um, Don Davis had a chance. You could see in the news, in the public eye, that Ngannou and Dana were not doing well. That story early on looked like, especially with the negotiations with Juan and a few things like that. That story early on looked like Ngannou was not going back to the UFC. It was a way to kind of poke the bigger show in the eye. That's what I think. I think he let his ego operate that, but it has not been a good business move in any way, shape, or form for the PFL to have signed Ngannou. Um, yeah, and they've let him go to boxing twice just to sort of keep him happy and get him in the octagon or in the cage once. But now that they've seen the results and that Ngannou is not, the crossover name that attracts millions of pay-per-views, um, I'm pretty sure they regret that decision. I think you're absolutely right.
Now, speaking of poking the eye, this is a good transition to GFL. Poking the eye to the fans that are going to watch it. But I
Well,
will play
there's one
dev.
more thing I want. There's one
Okay.
more thing I want to say against the tournament format. I dabble into a
Okay.
little bit of history here. If you look him up, a very interesting fighter. He lists a couple of hundred boxing matches in his career from the turn of the last century in the 1900s. It's a guy named Willie Meehan. And Willie Meehan had the distinction of actually beating Jack Dempsey in a smoker fight it was a 4-round fight when Dempsey was coming up. He fought Dempsey and Meehan fought 4 times. Dempsey won 3 of them, but Meehan actually owns a win over Jack Dempsey. And one newspaper, I believe it was maybe the Pittsburgh Gazette, one newspaper interviewed Willie Meehan before Dempsey's title fight with Tommy Burns. And um, Meehan, they asked him, who do you think is going to win? And, Meehan said, he thought Dempsey was going to win is the long and short of it. But he said something that always stuck with me. And he goes, Jack Dempsey hit me with a body shot that I felt for 2 years. 2 years. So in my diatribe against the tournament format, what happens if you're a fighter and you got to fight in June and then you got to fight in August? And in June, you get a 1 minute fight, and then the guy who you're supposed to take on gets a 15-minute fight where he's been taking leg kicks, a lot of leg kicks, a lot of calf kicks, and body shots. And maybe he gets hit with a body shot like Willie Meehan got hit with. A body shot that takes you a more substantial time to recover than the time you're being given between fights. Do you think that maybe there are fighters, maybe, Hamzat or some of these crazy guys from Chechnya or whatever, would do the fight anyway? But I think most fighters, having been through a 15-round war, facing a guy with limited recovery time, a shortened camp, who's been in a fight that was 1 minute, most guys would rethink that fight. And that could be the number one reason that they start to lose fights, is if you get guys in a knockdown, drag out barn burner, and you're like, oh, that was a great fight, and he's going to make highlight reels and stuff like that. But then you can't bring the guy back because he needs more than 7 or 8 weeks recovery time in order to get into the ring and be in real shape.
Yeah.
So yeah, the tournament format is, as you said, a good way get attention and a good way, if you get lucky, to have some success, some limited success, especially in presenting a guy to the audience that sees him a few times and things like that. But over time, it's not sustainable.
It's interesting. But so let's get back to the GFL that I was gonna. We want to touch on this, at least on this show. Now, I know I said it'll be like a thumb in the eye of the fans, but I do. I could play a little devil's advocate here, in that I wouldn't want to get in the way of a guy making money, even though, like you said, it may not be the most ideal way given their age and whatnot. But yeah, I'm kind of torn in that respect, that I don't want to sit here and say, no, you can't have that payday. Go do something else. But the card itself, it's like just nothing but people that probably wouldn't be fighting otherwise, and it's hard to understand.
I went through the whole card. Okay, there are uh, a couple of fighters that the date of birth is not part of Sherdog or the public record yet. It means that they've been local fighters because they haven't had to present their passport to a boxing commission or to wherever, so that their date of birth becomes public record. So there were two fighters on the card where we don't know the date of birth. And to be honest with you, both of them were ladies, and both of them kind of were on the baby face side. So they might be in their prime. They might not be older. All the rest of the fighters, and I think they announced 12 fights, right? So all the other 20 fighters, of the 20 fighters, 2 of them are under 30 years old. There are more fighters over 40 than under 30 on that card. And again, I don't want to, I don't want to take money away from fighters either. I'd be the last person who would want them to not make money. But when you're a 45-year-old getting into the ring, you're not. This is a young man's sport. We've said this in other podcasts also. This is a young man's sport. We've seen, at 40, but 45 is not 50 something, but age is extremely, extremely. We could point to the Jake Paul fight against Mike Tyson. Mike, as hard as he trained, and we saw videos, maybe there was some editing and creative ability there. And for all his, pedigree and history, and Mike, I think, Mike's not, Mike is in his old age, he's become, a public persona and a nice guy, and people have sort of forgotten, like, him going to jail and some things, or at least they're forgiving him for that, and that stuff no longer comes up as much. But once you get Mike Tyson into a fight, I think you're looking at a guy who I think he would. What I'm getting at is his body was not able to perform. And you're talking about a stand-up game where all you really have to do is have a little bit of legs and box. Now you're going to be talking about 45-year-olds who got to go to the ground, stand back up, try to take that. Can you imagine anything worse than watching, 45-year-olds, spend 2.5 rounds taking shots from across the ring because their wrestling ability is not what it was when they were 25, i.e. Uriah Faber. Uriah, sure. And here's the other part is Uriah, I believe, is one of the guys that did well with his money. That was not a guy that he had some business savvy. He made good money. He marketed that, and he should have money. So of course, somebody offers you $5 million or whatever kind of ridiculous purse they have. Of course, you're gonna have to say, well, that's a good amount of money and stuff. But Uriah Faber's ability to perform the way he did when he was a star is not going to be there. So what these people are paying for is it's like a retirement check, or like you're not paying for the competition that they're going to do next month or whenever the fight is. You're paying for their history in the sport. And that is not, again, that's another one of those unsustainable ways. Holly Holm, 41. Renan Barao, Renan Barao is 38, so he actually is under 40, but over 35, 38. But Renan Barao, he's 0-6 in his last 6 fights. He fought one time in 2024, and then before that had not fought since 2019. And in 2019, when he left the sport, at that point, he was on a 5-fight losing streak, and then came back and lost the next one. Yeah. Renan Barao shouldn't even be given a license to fight based on those performances. And again, I don't want to be the guy who takes money away from them and stuff like that. But money, if you're coming back for the money, other things, smarter heads, people in the boxing commission should consider some of the risks around there. Yeah, I'm sure they're going to do 1 card, 2 cards, however many cards, and these guys maybe will take home some money. But you keep pushing the envelope this way, you're going to wind up with a tragedy. Or you're going to wind up with something else, which is going to be, I don't know, for lack of a better word, fighters taking a knee. You know, Uriah Faber got some money in the bank. This fight's going to be a nice payday for him, and he's fighting Renan Barao, right? So this could go either way, but Renan has lost 0-6 in his last 6 fights. He's lost his last fights. He starts having a hard time early in round 2. He's like, man, there's no way I can beat this guy. Why would he fight the way they do in the UFC octagon? Um, you know, making an effort. Why not just bail out? And if you're not delivering 100% in the ring, like I said, I think you're more likely to do that when you're a veteran who's had 40 fights, who's coming back, and your explicit reason for coming back is the money. Now, if the company judges that the performance is not up to speed, or that that you didn't give 100%, they could probably maybe hold up your pay, and then that could be. None of that's good for the sport. None of that's good for the GFL. If they say, "Hey, look, it wasn't a work, but Renan didn't give us his 100%, or Uriah didn't give us his 100%," when it looked like, um, when it looked like in his mind, like he's like, "I can't win," he just bailed out. Wait, stopped on the stool. You know what I mean? And they can hold up your pay. Again, the publicity of holding up fighters' pay and stuff like that, wrong way to go for any company. But do you run a serious risk of putting 40-something-year-old men into the octagon to fight together and expecting them to give you 100%? And what does 100% look like? Can you even tell what's 100%? Because of the drop off from when these guys were in their prime. It's a pretty good card. One of the fighters, I'm sorry, it's a pretty good card for 2012.
Yeah.
One of the fighters that's under 30 there, one of the two, is Sage Northcutt. Okay, but Sage he's 29 now, right? So ostensibly he would be in his prime, but he's had layoffs. He never turned into, what Dana thought he would turn into. So he's been a little bit of a journeyman. He's gone to one, and he's gone to certain other companies and stuff, and he has some name recognition, but I don't think Sage is making 7-figure paydays. But what he does have is he has a history of a broken orbital. Again, he has more reasons to quit in a fight than to keep fighting. And that's what I look at the GFL card, and I think, if not this one, then keep offering similar cards like this, where everybody's older, where guys are fighting each other for the 4th time. You've got let me see which fighter was that. Anthony Pettis, 30-something, 39, 38. Also 1-4 in his last few fights. Questionable whether he should even be licensed. Benson Henderson, they're fighting for the 4th time. And sure, again, and so their paycheck is more related, like it's more justifiable if it would be more honest if they said, well, you remember that spectacular kick that Pettis used, jumping off the cage and then landing on Henderson and knocking him out? That's what they're being paid for 15 years later.
Yeah.
Because, seeing them rerun that for the 4th time, and Henderson's 41. Henderson was known. What was his nickname? Bendy.
No, smooth.
Okay, smooth. Okay, but he was known as very flexible and bendable.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like you could not catch him in submissions and stuff. But I present to you,
ridiculous.
When you're 41, you're not. You've already started to lose. And again, these guys, Henderson, this guy was an A-list athlete when he was in his 20s and when he was at the top of the game there. And so you never know, but by 41, some of that is going to be lost.
Yeah.
Some of that is going to be lost. Could he even get himself into a dangerous position because his body wants to react the way he was when he was 28 and UFC champion and no longer can? So yeah, there isn't a single fight on this card that doesn't bear that level of risk, where the guys are too old or too recycled in the sport so that there's not some risk. This is a card that was put together by fans who loved the sport 15 years ago and recognized, hey, all these guys, Renan Barrow's available. Renan Barrow at one point was probably a top 3 pound for pound fighter in the world.
No doubt.
You know,
Mhm.
but why you would think that he deserves to be paid now when he's been 0-6? No. And yeah, maybe you want to get him in the ring. And here's the other part: is maybe Uriah Faber, maybe Holly Holm, but there's no real big name recognition on this card whatsoever. You know, Pettis left the UFC and has been fighting on smaller shows and running his own show
Yeah, he runs
for
his
a
own
long
show. Yeah.
for a long
APFC.
time. Yeah, for a good amount of time. Um, Henderson also, I think he fought in 2023 was his last fight. So, and again, but he's 41. He's not in the public eye anymore. Not people are not wondering, hey, where's Benson Henderson? You know, and that applies all the way across the board. Holly Holm also. Holly Holm is 41. Um, you know, I think to me, Holly Holm is maybe one of the least respected athletes of our time. And I don't mean that she doesn't deserve respect. I mean she deserves a mountain of respect. And she did something that nobody will ever do again. And that is be a boxing world champion and a UFC world champion. That achievement alone puts her as the elite of the elite in terms of accomplishments in combat sports.
Yeah.
But she's 41. It's been a while since we've seen her, and now we're going to see her on a lesser show. And based on what their draft looked like, I'm going to surmise that the GFL, and again, and if they do present a live event and a production for TV similar to the UFC, then you could just say, well, they're not only overpaying fighters, they're overpaying executive producers and directors and this, that, and the other stuff. They're overpaying everybody.
Do you
So
think
I'm
the
I'm
show
gonna
happens?
I you know oh you're putting on my mystic
Because
Miguel.
yeah, I'll let you do the miss. And the reason I'm asking is we talked about this. Obviously, they found someone who was dumb enough to give him this money, or is it just that they're not going to have the show and maybe declare bankruptcy or something, not pay anyone? I don't know.
You know yeah. So this could go one of two ways. Okay, either the money people are all in, and this will be the last show because when they get the bottom lines afterwards, they're going to be like, well, we just got, you know, we just lost a lot of money, and that'll be the end of it. Or somewhere along the line, they're going to try and find, a couple of weeks before the show, what kind of heat the show has. Is it sold? Is it sold out? Um, what TV channel is this thing going to be on?
I don't know yet.
Yeah, maybe they don't get on TV, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, all those things. Well, we didn't get on TV. We thought we had a deal, and that would help us bring in some money. Um, you know, um, is the live event sold out? They could bail out before. They could easily bail out before. But maybe they do one show but I don't think this has a lot of success. I'm looking up here, and they've announced the Shrine Auditorium, which is relatively small venue, 6,000 people in California, and maybe maybe the live show, maybe they have some things that might fool them, like, you know, Uriah Faber might rise up and sell 1,000 tickets. You know what I mean? I think Uriah was always a good ticket seller, and he had a certain amount of charisma. There may be enough people that want to see him one last time, kind of thing. Um, so yeah, so maybe the show gets sold out and they do it. But if you're on the week of the show, if you're looking at 800 tickets sold, I would cancel the show,
Yeah.
considering all the investment they're going to make.
Yeah,
What
that's
were the
interesting.
paydays? What were the paydays that were announced?
No, they haven't been, but I just know Josh Emmett said that Uriah Faber's getting paid so much that he wish he could do one fight in the GFL and then go back to the UFC, which is pretty sad.
So it says GFL here. This is in Facebook. Let's see if this is okay. So they've got Dos Santos, Wardun, Arlovsky, and Frank Mir. Again, if there's a guy under 40 here, I don't think there is. I think these guys are all over 40. And on one spot, it says that one of these heavyweights is going to make 1.4 million for a fight.
Yeah.
That's not to mention the rest of the card, not to mention, like we said, all the production and all kinds of things. So let's see here. 1.4 million. So just to pay this one guy, if they're in the Shrine Auditorium with 6,300 people, they would have to get at least $225 per ticket, every ticket, in order to cover just that one fighter. And we're not sure if they're going to be on TV or not or anything like that. So where are the revenue streams? Where is the extra money going to come on at this? Let's see. MMA 24/7 is one of the logos on the poster, but there's no TV channel logo. There's no. Put a gun to my head, I say this show doesn't happen.
That's a bit interesting one to step out on. Yeah. Mystic Miguel. We're gonna see. That's awesome. To get another Mystic Miguel prediction to end the show.
Yeah. But I just there's unless the money people behind this said, we're in this for 5 years, we don't care what we lose, we want to give this a real shot, and they're going to keep trying it. But there is no way, especially like so. If a heavyweight is making 1.4 million, what could be the money that Duffy or Josh Emmett rather said that Faber's getting, and he's got Mendez on this fight too, So with Mendez and Faber, you're talking about two guys, decorated guys that were, at the top of the game 15 years ago.
I liked Mendez and BKFC actually.
Yeah, Mendez is one of those guys that was another one of those elite athletes.
Yeah.
At some point there were enough elite athletes do have the ability to give you signature performances when they're in their prime. But again, let's see how old is Chad Mendez.
He stayed in incredible shape too.
Yeah, and I'm sure what's his name? Uriah is probably not in bad shape, Chad Mendez is 39 years old.
He was just boxing, and they went BKFC. He did real well.
Yeah, but I wonder, with BKFC, I wonder if if Mendez has some injectable help.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah.
And in a boxing commission, state of California, he runs the risk of getting some type of testing. If he's smart and those guys are from a professional camp and he's doing something like that, he could probably mask it or avoid detection. But should he get caught, then that big payday is no longer what that big payday was, and it all starts to fall apart. But if a heavyweight is at 1.4 million, what do you think Faber's getting?
Yeah.
Faber's probably the most, along with maybe Holly Holm, the most recognizable name on the shows.
Mhm.
What is Mendez getting? Faber getting 1 million, Mendez getting 750, 500,000, something along those lines. There's no way that this show can make money.
It's going to burn
Especially,
money. It's going to get blasted.
yeah. So again, this was somebody who was a fan putting together matches, like you said, with the dartboard. This guy's available. Oh, remember that great fight Faber had with Barao? Let's do it a third time. Let's do Pettis and Henderson a fourth time. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. That's not at all. Um, you know, at this point, the UFC has broken the sport enough that there's no real way to start a new company. But this is definitely the wrong way to go, because if you start a new company, um, with new athletes and smaller paydays and try to build up, at least you're not going to lose millions. But this show looks like it's going to lose millions.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out for sure. Well, Miguel, as always, appreciate talking to you. I got to run. I got some stuff I got to do today. But
All right.
people checking this out, as always, we appreciate the support. Like I said, subscribe to the channel. Check us out. Check out Miguel on Instagram, MMA History Guy, at MMA History Guy. And yeah, we'll be back with more episodes. And until next time, take care.
Up, everybody? It's your boy Drew with High Fight IQ, and you are now watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with my boys Todd Adkins and Miguel Iturrate. Miguel has been the matchmaker for over 200 shows worldwide and has worked with Hook and Shoot, Euphoria, Bodog, and ADCC. Make sure you subscribe to the Todd Atkins Show on YouTube. You can also find Miguel on his YouTube channel at MMA Collector 74. Don't forget to subscribe to High Fight IQ on all social media platforms. The House Call Sports on YouTube, the Fight Pit on YouTube. Now let's talk some fights, baby. Let's go.